Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the golden sands of ancient Egypt, a land of grand pyramids, powerful pharaohs, and some surprisingly innovative hygiene practices. Picture this. The relentless sun beats down on the hot, dusty ground as you trudge through a bustling marketplace along the banks of the Nile. Vendors hawk dates and honey, their voices rising above the chatter of the crowd. The air is thick with the scent of incense and the musty aroma of animal hides drying in the sun. Your mouth is dry, gritty with sand, and your teeth? Well, let's just say you probably wouldn't last long without some kind of oral hygiene routine. You might think of toothbrushes as a modern invention, but the truth is, the ancient Egyptians were way ahead of the game. Thousands of years ago, long before bristled brushes and minty pastes, they faced a serious problem. Keeping their teeth clean amidst all that desert dust and coarse, gritty food. And while their methods might seem crude by today's standards, they were actually pretty inventive. But before we get into that, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins not in a grand palace or a bustling temple, but in the everyday homes of ordinary Egyptians. Imagine stepping into a modest mud brick house where a family gathers for breakfast. Their meal is simple. Bread baked from coarse emmer wheat, dried fish, maybe some dates or figs. But every bite is loaded with tiny grains of sand that grind against your teeth like a slow, relentless erosion. This wasn't just an occasional annoyance, it was a daily reality. And while the food was often tough and gritty, the water wasn't much better. Drawn from the Nile and stored in large clay jars, it carried a sediment of fine silt that swirled around with every sip. You could feel it between your teeth, a constant reminder that life in Egypt was sandy in more ways than one. So, what did they do to keep their mouths clean? Enter the humble chew stick. Imagine a thin branch, roughly the size of a pencil, stripped of its bark and chewed until the fibers frayed and softened. These twigs came from various trees, including the Salvadora persica, which is still used in some parts of the world today. It may not look like much, but that little stick was a lifeline for anyone trying to scrape off plaque or sand particles without modern toothpaste. And here's where things get interesting. While chewing on sticks might seem primitive, the Egyptians actually chose specific woods known for their antimicrobial properties. These natural compounds helped fight off bacteria, much like modern toothpaste does with fluoride. Clever, right? But not everyone could afford the good stuff. Wealthier Egyptians had access to more effective, fragrant woods, while the poor made do with whatever twigs they could find. This simple tool, however, laid the groundwork for what would eventually evolve into something far more sophisticated. The first true toothbrush. You wake up with a dry mouth and a gritty feeling between your teeth. The relentless Egyptian sun is already baking the mud brick walls of your home, and the air smells of fresh bread and the earthy scent of wet clay. Outside, the streets are bustling as vendors set up their stalls, hawking everything from sweet figs to fragrant incense. But as you rub the sleep from your eyes and step outside, there's one thing on your mind: how to get rid of that stale, dusty taste in your mouth. Today, you're not reaching for a modern toothbrush. Instead, you're grabbing something far simpler, a twig. But not just any twig. This is a chew stick, carefully selected for its soft, fraying fibers and natural cleansing properties. It's thin and sturdy, about the length of your hand, and it comes from the Salvadora persica tree. Today, we know it as the toothbrush tree, but back then, It was just a common sight along the Nile. You slide the end of the twig into your mouth and begin to chew. The fibers separate, turning the end into a soft, brush-like tool. As you run it over your teeth, it scrapes away bits of grit and sand, working like a primitive but effective toothbrush. The taste is earthy, slightly bitter, but it's worth it for the way it leaves your mouth feeling cleaner and fresher. For centuries, the Egyptians relied on these chew sticks as their primary oral hygiene tool. But the practice wasn't unique to them. In fact, similar methods popped up in other parts of the ancient world. The Babylonians, the Chinese, and even the Greeks all had their versions of the chew stick, each using different woods with unique cleansing properties. But Egypt's dry, dusty environment made the chew stick more than just a good habit. It was a necessity. Of course, not all chew sticks were created equal. The wealthy could afford the finest twigs, sometimes imported from far-off regions where specific woods were prized for their natural antiseptic qualities. These high-quality sticks were infused with fragrant resins, creating a rudimentary mouthwash effect as you chewed. Meanwhile, the poor used whatever local branches they could find, often less effective, but still better than nothing. And it wasn't just about keeping teeth clean. Chew sticks also served as a kind of early breath freshener. Certain woods released aromatic oils when chewed, masking the smell of stale bread and dried fish. After all, when you're living in a society that places a high value on appearances, you don't want to walk around smelling like last night's dinner. But chew sticks weren't the only tool in the ancient Egyptian dental arsenal. Over time, people began to experiment with other natural materials to create more advanced cleaning devices. Some used strips of linen or fine reeds, rubbing them along their teeth to dislodge stubborn debris. Others chewed on resinous sap, letting the sticky substance pull away food particles and freshen their breath. Still, for most Egyptians, the chew stick remained the go-to choice. It was simple, effective, and readily available, a small but vital part of the daily routine. And while it might seem primitive to us now, it laid the groundwork for what would eventually evolve into something much more sophisticated. But what about toothpaste? Surely, they didn't just rely on twigs and sap to keep their mouths clean. Oh no. The Egyptians had something far more inventive and far more bizarre up their sleeves. Imagine kneeling in the dim, cool corner of a mud brick house. The floor is smooth, packed earth, and in front of you sits a low, flat stone, a makeshift grinding slab. Beside it, a collection of small clay jars filled with odd ingredients: burnt eggshells, crushed pumice, and yes, a heaping pile of crocodile dung. You're about to make toothpaste, ancient Egyptian style. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, keep in mind that crocodile dung wasn't just some wild experiment. The Egyptians were remarkably resourceful, and they believed that the powdered excrement had magical, even medicinal properties. It was thought to ward off evil spirits and protect the body from decay, an important concern in a society where preparing for the afterlife was a full-time job. But let's back up a bit. How did they even come up with the idea of toothpaste? Well, it all started with that coarse, gritty diet. The staple foods of ancient Egypt, bread made from emmer wheat and barley, mixed with ground-up sand and stone, were like eating tiny shards of glass. Over time, this wore down the enamel, exposing sensitive inner layers and leading to tooth decay. So, to combat that constant wear and tear, Egyptians began experimenting with various powders and pastes. The earliest recipes were simple: a bit of salt mixed with ground pumice stone or ashes from burnt ox hooves. The resulting paste was gritty and abrasive, but it effectively scraped away plaque and sand deposits. But as time went on, the recipes grew more elaborate. One particularly memorable formula called for powdered ox hooves, burnt eggshells, and crushed pumice, mixed with a dash of water to form a gritty, chalky paste. It might not sound like much, but it got the job done. And the sensation? Imagine rubbing a handful of fine gravel across your teeth. It was a bit like brushing with sandpaper, but it was better than letting your teeth rot. For the wealthier Egyptians, the formulas became even more exotic. Enter the crocodile dung. It was dried, ground into a fine powder, and added to the paste as both an abrasive and a supposed magical ingredient. Whether it actually helped clean teeth or just added a certain, shall we say, aroma, is up for debate. Historians still argue whether the dung was included for its abrasive quality or its symbolic power. After all, crocodiles were considered sacred to the god Sobek, the fearsome protector of the Nile. Maybe a little spiritual protection was just what your pearly whites needed. But it wasn't all grit and dung. The Egyptians were also fans of adding fragrant herbs and spices to their pastes. Peppermint, myrrh, and cinnamon were popular, not just for their scent, but for their antimicrobial properties. In fact, myrrh resin was so prized for its medicinal effects that it was used in everything from toothpaste to embalming fluid. Imagine dipping your chewed stick into a bowl of this pungent paste, the scent of myrrh wafting up as you begin to scrub. The paste grinds against your teeth, scraping away sand and plaque, while the herbal oils leave a faintly bitter but oddly refreshing taste. It's a far cry from the minty gels we use today, but in a world without modern dentistry, it was a lifesaver. And it wasn't just for daily hygiene. The Egyptians also used these pastes for special occasions and rituals. Before entering a temple or meeting with a high-ranking official, you'd make sure your teeth were polished and your breath fresh. After all, in a society where appearance and scent carried spiritual significance, bad breath was more than just a social faux pas. It was practically a sin. But brushing with crocodile dung paste wasn't exactly the height of luxury. If you were a member of the royal court or a wealthy merchant, you had access to something a little more refined. Tooth powders imported from distant lands, infused with rare spices and aromatic resins. These powders were finely ground, almost silky in texture, and stored in elaborately carved containers made of alabaster or faience. For everyone else, it was back to the old grindstone, mixing up whatever abrasive materials were available, be it ox hooves, charred barley, or the occasional dash of crocodile dung. And yet, despite the strange ingredients and the rough texture, these early toothpastes were surprisingly effective at scrubbing away the daily buildup of sand and grit. But there was still one problem they hadn't quite solved yet: the toothbrush itself. How do you take that gritty, abrasive paste and actually get it onto your teeth in a way that's both effective and, well, not excruciatingly painful? The answer? A clever combination of feathers, fibers, and a little bit of ancient ingenuity. It's early morning, and you're standing by the edge of the Nile, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink. Fishermen cast their nets, and the air smells faintly of wet reeds and silt. In your hand, you hold what might be considered the world's first toothbrush, a simple twig, chewed at the end to fray the fibers into a soft brush. But today, you're about to try something new. You step inside your home, where a low wooden table is set with a small array of cleaning tools. There's the familiar chew stick, but next to it, a more sophisticated creation. A short, slender branch with feathers bound to the end, secured with a bit of twine. This is a prototype of the first true toothbrush, a combination of natural materials designed to scrub and polish teeth more effectively than a simple twig ever could. For centuries, the Egyptians had relied on chew sticks alone, but as their society became more advanced, so did their dental tools. Artisans began experimenting with combining multiple textures, a soft, feathered end for brushing, and a more rigid, frayed end for scraping. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was a step forward. Imagine holding one of these early brushes, its handle still slightly rough from the carving process. The feathered end feels delicate against your teeth, like a gentle broom sweeping away dust. Meanwhile, the frayed end works more like a modern toothbrush, grinding the abrasive paste across your enamel to scrub away sand and plaque. But what about the materials? While commoners used local reeds or date palm fibers, the wealthy could afford something a bit more exotic. Ostrich feathers were particularly prized for their softness and durability, while imported woods provided firmer, more resilient handles. The rich even had their handles inlaid with gold or semi-precious stones, transforming a simple hygiene tool into a status symbol. Yet, for the average Egyptian, a brush made of feathers and fibers was still a luxury. Most people stuck to their tried-and-true chew sticks, or fashioned makeshift brushes out of soft grass stems or strips of linen. But as more advanced brushes became available, some households began to adopt them as part of their morning routine, especially in the homes of priests and scribes, who were expected to maintain a polished appearance. And there was another benefit to the feathered brushes: they were easier to clean. After all, when your toothbrush is a stick you've chewed on for days, it gets pretty nasty pretty fast. But a feathered brush could be rinsed and dried, its delicate bristles gently fluffed back into shape after each use. Of course, not everyone was a fan. Some Egyptians found the new brushes too soft, preferring the more aggressive scraping power of the chew stick. Others complained that the feathers wore down too quickly, becoming soggy and ineffective after just a few uses. But despite these drawbacks, the feathered brush marked a turning point in Egyptian dental care. It represented a shift from purely functional tools to more refined, specialized instruments, a reflection of the growing sophistication of Egyptian society as a whole. And it wasn't just about oral hygiene. The Egyptians believed that cleanliness was a matter of both physical and spiritual health. Bad breath wasn't just unpleasant. It was thought to be a sign of internal decay, a mark of impurity that could offend the gods. So brushing your teeth wasn't just about keeping your breath fresh. It was about purifying your entire being. But brushing alone wasn't enough. Even with their fancy new brushes, the Egyptians still needed something to make the experience a bit more pleasant. That's where the paste came in. And as we move forward, you'll see how the evolution of toothpaste became a story of exotic spices, fragrant resins, and one truly bizarre ingredient that you definitely wouldn't expect to find in a dental product. Morning in ancient Egypt is a sensory experience. Warm sunlight filtering through reed mats, the scent of bread baking in clay ovens, and the distant echo of water sloshing against wooden boats on the Nile. But inside your mud brick house, it's time for the morning ritual of cleaning your teeth. You sit cross-legged on the cool, packed earth floor. In front of you is a small stone bowl filled with a gritty, grayish paste. The scent is unmistakable, sharp and earthy, with a hint of something vaguely spicy. This isn't just any paste. It's a concoction carefully mixed by your mother, a blend of burnt eggshells, crushed rock salt, and a pinch of powdered myrrh. You scoop up a bit of the paste with your fingertips, rubbing it along your gums and teeth. The texture is rough, almost sandy, and it scrapes against your enamel like fine gravel. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's effective. And in a world where bread is packed with tiny stones and the air is filled with drifting sand, you need all the scrubbing power you can get. For most Egyptians, brushing wasn't just a solitary act, it was a family affair. Children sat alongside their parents, each one using their own chew stick or feathered brush, passing around the bowl of paste as they chatted about the day ahead. The morning air filled with the sound of gentle scraping and the faint crunch of grit against teeth. But for the wealthy and powerful, oral hygiene was a much more refined experience. Imagine stepping inside a grand villa where servants prepare elaborate morning rituals for the household. In a room lined with alabaster jars and bronze bowls, a servant carefully grinds the day's toothpaste, this time a luxurious blend of frankincense, honey, and ground pumice stone. The paste is finer, almost smooth, and it smells faintly of sweet resin and warm spice. The lady of the house sits before a polished copper mirror, her maid dipping a soft reed brush into the fragrant paste. The maid gently brushes her mistress's teeth, taking care to avoid the sensitive areas where the gum has receded, exposing the roots. After all, even the wealthiest Egyptians weren't immune to dental problems. In fact, the very foods that marked their status, rich pastries, sticky honey cakes, and dried dates, often caused more dental decay than the simple diets of the poor. But what about the pharaohs? Surely, they had access to the best dental care in the land. And they did. Royal households had their own designated dentists, who were responsible for preparing special tooth powders and pastes using rare and exotic ingredients. These royal blends often contained a mix of salt, charcoal, and crushed gemstones, all believed to have cleansing and protective properties. One particularly peculiar ingredient found in some royal recipes: ground ox hooves. Yes, you heard that right. The tough, keratin-rich material was pulverized into a fine dust and added to the paste as an abrasive. It was gritty, harsh, and incredibly effective at scraping away plaque. But it also wore down enamel faster than any other ingredient. And once the enamel was gone, there was no getting it back. Meanwhile, out in the bustling streets of Thebes or Memphis, ordinary Egyptians took a more pragmatic approach. Vendors sold tiny clay pots of simple tooth powders at the marketplace, each one containing a slightly different blend of ashes, ground barley, and salt. These powders were affordable and readily available, making them the go-to choice for most commoners. But no matter how luxurious or basic the paste, one thing remained the same. Brushing was an essential part of the morning routine. In a culture that valued cleanliness as a sign of spiritual purity, having fresh breath and clean teeth was more than just a matter of hygiene. It was a matter of honor. And so, each morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the rooftops and the temple priests began their chants, Egyptians young and old reached for their chew sticks, their feathered brushes, and their gritty pastes. They scraped and brushed, rinsed and spat, readying themselves for another day under the blazing desert sun. But what about the elite? The pharaohs? The royal priests? Surely they had even more elaborate routines to protect those dazzling white smiles. And as we step into the next section, we'll see just how far some of Egypt's most powerful figures went to keep their teeth shining bright. The royal palace is alive with the sounds of bustling servants and echoing footsteps. Marble floors gleam under the soft light of hanging oil lamps, and the scent of perfumed oils drifts through the air. In a chamber adorned with gold-framed mirrors and intricate carvings of gods and goddesses, the pharaoh reclines on a cushioned bench, ready for his morning dental ritual. But this isn't just any routine cleaning. For a ruler who is considered a living god, every aspect of personal care is elevated to a sacred act. In the corner of the room, a royal dentist kneels beside a low wooden table covered with alabaster jars and small bronze bowls. Each vessel contains a carefully prepared blend of tooth powders and pastes, crafted from the finest and most exotic ingredients. Today's mixture is a royal concoction fit for a pharaoh, a blend of powdered emerald, myrrh resin, and a touch of frankincense. The emerald dust is said to possess mystical protective properties, warding off evil spirits and ensuring that the ruler's words remain pure. The myrrh and frankincense? Those are the real workhorses, their antimicrobial properties fighting against the buildup of plaque and bacteria. The royal dentist dips a slender ivory brush into the shimmering green paste, the bristles made from carefully plucked ostrich feathers bound with linen twine. He approaches the pharaoh with a bow, then begins the delicate work of brushing each tooth with the utmost care. The paste is gritty but fragrant, leaving a lingering scent of spice and resin as it scrapes away the remnants of last night's feast: honey cakes, roasted quail, and spiced wine. And the pharaoh is far from the only one receiving this royal treatment. In the court of Queen Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's most powerful female rulers, dental care was equally refined. The queen, known for her love of exotic fragrances and rare spices, commissioned her own personal blend of toothpaste, a mixture of ground pearls, cinnamon, and lotus oil. The pearls provided a mild abrasive, the cinnamon a spicy, invigorating scent, and the lotus oil a hint of floral sweetness. But Hatshepsut's dental routine wasn't just about cleaning. It was also a way of asserting her royal status. After all, in a culture that placed immense importance on appearance and ritual, having fresh breath and gleaming teeth wasn't just a sign of good hygiene. It was a mark of divine favor. The queen's personal attendants would polish her teeth to a gleaming shine, then rinse her mouth with a blend of rose water and honey, leaving her breath sweet and fragrant. Meanwhile, in the temples of Karnak, the high priests followed their own rigorous dental routines. As intermediaries between the gods and the people, priests were expected to maintain physical purity, and that extended to their teeth. Each morning, before entering the sacred chambers to conduct rituals, the priests would purify themselves using a special tooth powder made from ground alabaster, frankincense, and a dash of mint. The powder was gritty, almost sandy, but it left their mouths feeling cool and refreshed. A small but vital preparation before speaking sacred words to the gods. But even the most lavish toothpaste couldn't prevent the inevitable problems that came with age. Despite their best efforts, many royals and priests suffered from severe dental issues. The rich, sugary diet of the elite took its toll, leading to cavities, abscesses, and even tooth loss. And with no anesthetics or modern dental tools, treating these conditions was a brutal affair. Imagine a royal dentist hovering over the pharaoh, a bronze probe in hand. The dentist gently prods at a decaying tooth, wincing as the pharaoh flinches in pain. With no effective pain relief available, dental treatments were often more torture than cure. And for the most severe cases, the only option was extraction, a slow, agonizing process involving stone or bronze tools and a whole lot of courage. Yet despite the primitive tools and often painful procedures, the Egyptians remained committed to their dental rituals. After all, in a society where one's appearance was considered a reflection of one's soul, maintaining a perfect smile was more than just vanity. It was a spiritual duty. And it wasn't just the pharaohs and priests who suffered through these excruciating treatments. The common people also faced the constant threat of tooth decay, and their remedies were far less luxurious than those of the royal court. As we move forward, we'll step outside the palace walls and into the bustling marketplaces and humble homes where everyday Egyptians relied on some truly bizarre and surprisingly effective methods to keep their teeth clean. Outside the palace walls, the streets of Thebes are alive with the sights and sounds of daily life. Merchants shout out their wares, children dart between stalls, and the scent of roasted barley mingles with the unmistakable odor of dried fish. In the midst of this bustling chaos, you weave through the crowd, heading toward a small, smoky shop tucked between two mud brick houses. This is where the common folk come to get their tooth powders. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman with a toothless grin, sits cross-legged on a reed mat, grinding something in a stone mortar. The air is thick with the scent of burnt barley and crushed mint leaves, a simple but effective recipe that most Egyptians could afford. The woman grins as she scoops a handful of the coarse gray powder into a small clay pot. "For the teeth," she says, handing it to a young mother holding a fidgety child. The child scowls, but the mother nods, tucking the pot into her basket along with a bundle of chew sticks. Chew sticks are the workhorse of commoner dental care. Simple, readily available, and surprisingly effective. Most are cut from the twigs of the Salvadora persica tree, a plant that's not just sturdy, but also naturally antimicrobial. The Egyptians call it the toothbrush tree, and for good reason. The fibers, once chewed and frayed, act as natural bristles, scrubbing away plaque and sand while releasing a slightly bitter but cleansing taste. You pick up one of the chew sticks, biting down to soften the fibers. It's not exactly pleasant. The taste is earthy, almost peppery, but as you rub it across your teeth, you can feel the fine fibers scraping away the grit left over from yesterday's bread. But chew sticks weren't the only option for the common folk. Those who couldn't afford proper tooth powders often resorted to other, more peculiar methods. One popular remedy involved mixing a handful of burnt barley ash with a dash of rock salt. The resulting paste was harsh and abrasive, but it got the job done. And then there were the truly desperate remedies. Some Egyptians believed that chewing on pieces of dried fish scales could help clean the teeth. Others swore by rinsing their mouths with a mixture of vinegar and honey, a concoction that was as acidic as it was sweet. But the most bizarre method of all, crushed mouse bones. Yes, you heard that right. Mouse bones, dried and ground into a fine powder, were thought to have magical protective properties. In a world where superstition and medicine often blended together, it wasn't uncommon to see a worried mother sprinkling a bit of mouse bone dust over her child's gums, hoping to ward off tooth decay. Meanwhile, in the poorer districts of Thebes, some households took a more communal approach to dental care. Families gathered around a single grinding stone, each taking turns pounding barley ash, rock salt, and dried mint leaves into a gritty powder. The children watched wide-eyed as the adults mixed the powder with a splash of water, turning it into a paste that would be passed around, each person rubbing a dab across their teeth with a frayed reed. But not every household could afford such luxuries. For those living in the slums or working as laborers on the massive construction projects of the pharaohs, brushing their teeth was a distant concern. These workers often ate hard, coarse bread that wore down their teeth to the gum line, leaving them with exposed roots and chronic pain. For them, the only dental care available was the occasional rinse with warm water, or a desperate prayer to Taweret, the hippopotamus-headed goddess of childbirth and household protection. Despite the challenges, the Egyptians were remarkably resourceful. They experimented with all sorts of strange and unexpected materials in their quest for a cleaner mouth. Some tried rubbing their teeth with crushed date pits, the rough texture acting as a crude abrasive. Others chewed on bits of clay, letting the fine particles polish their teeth while absorbing some of the bacteria. But even as commoners scraped and scrubbed their teeth with whatever they could find, they couldn't escape the inevitable effects of their diet. Grains ground with stone left tiny shards of quartz embedded in the flour, turning every meal into a dental hazard. Over time, this constant exposure to grit wore down their teeth to stubs, leaving the pulp exposed and vulnerable to infection. And what happened when tooth decay set in? There were no dentists in the modern sense. No drills, no fillings, no Novocaine. Instead, the best you could hope for was a local healer with a rudimentary knowledge of herbs and roots. They might pack your aching tooth with a poultice of crushed mint and honey, or rub your gums with a bit of juniper oil to numb the pain. But when the pain became unbearable, when infection set in, and the jaw began to swell, the only solution was extraction. And that, as you might imagine, was a brutal affair. You step into the cool, dimly lit chamber of a temple clinic. The walls are covered in vivid murals depicting gods and goddesses, each holding a symbol of healing: a scepter, a lotus flower, a serpent. The scent of burning incense hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the sharp, medicinal tang of herbs and oils. This is where the priests of Imhotep, the god of medicine and healing, practice their craft. But they aren't just priests. They're healers, herbalists, and in some cases, the closest thing ancient Egypt has to dentists. In a society where tooth decay is rampant and dental pain is a daily reality, these healers have developed a surprisingly sophisticated toolkit of remedies and procedures. At the center of the room, a patient sits on a low wooden stool, clutching his jaw and grimacing in pain. His cheek is swollen, his eyes bleary. The healer, a middle-aged man with a shaven head and calm, practiced hands, steps forward, inspecting the man's mouth. The diagnosis is clear: a rotting molar, blackened and oozing with infection. But before any extraction can take place, the healer must first numb the area. He reaches for a small clay jar filled with a thick, greenish paste. It's a blend of crushed mint leaves, poppy sap, and juniper oil, a natural anesthetic that not only dulls the pain, but also fights off infection. The healer dips his fingers into the paste and gently massages it onto the man's gums, his voice low and soothing as he chants a prayer to Imhotep. The patient shudders, sweat beading on his brow. The poppy sap begins to work its magic, dulling the pain and making his head swim. But the real work is just beginning. The healer picks up a bronze probe, its pointed end glinting in the dim light. He slides it between the decayed molar and the gum, probing for any signs of pus or trapped food. The patient winces as the probe scrapes against raw, inflamed flesh. But the healer isn't just looking for infection. He's also checking to see if the tooth is loose enough to be pulled. If it is, he'll move on to the next step: extraction. But if it's too firmly rooted, there's another option. The healer sets down the probe and reaches for a different tool, a small stone drill with a wooden handle. It's a primitive device, more like a bow drill than a modern dental instrument. The healer positions the drill against the decayed tooth and begins to spin it between his palms, grinding the stone tip against the enamel. The sound is grating, the sensation even worse, but the purpose is clear: to create a tiny opening through which the infection can drain. Once the hole is drilled, the healer packs it with a paste made from crushed dates, barley flour, and honey, a natural antiseptic that not only cleans the wound, but also helps to mask the bitter taste of infection. The patient's head lolls forward, the poppy sap still clouding his senses, as the healer mutters another prayer, asking for Imhotep's blessing. But not every patient is lucky enough to receive such careful treatment. In poorer districts, where skilled healers are scarce and priests charge exorbitant fees, people turn to more desperate measures. Some chew on pieces of garlic, hoping its pungent juice will draw out the infection. Others pack their cavities with crushed onion or even powdered herbs, desperate for relief. And for those with no access to healers or herbal remedies, there is only one option left: endure the pain, no matter how severe. You can almost hear the groans of a farmer lying in his darkened hut, his jaw throbbing as the infection spreads. There are no drills, no poppy sap, no chants to Imhotep, just a gnawing ache that worsens with every heartbeat. But not all dental care in ancient Egypt was so grim. In fact, some priests specialized in preventative care, crafting salves and powders designed to keep teeth strong and gums healthy. One such salve, made from crushed malachite and olive oil, was said to strengthen enamel and ward off evil spirits. Another, a paste of ground carob pods and honey, was believed to freshen the breath and soothe inflamed gums. These priests also practiced early forms of dental hygiene instruction. They taught people how to chew their food properly to prevent chipped teeth, how to rinse their mouths with water after eating to dislodge trapped grains, and how to massage their gums with a mixture of salt and mint to promote blood flow. But even with all these preventative measures, dental pain remained a constant presence in ancient Egyptian life. The combination of gritty bread, abrasive tooth powders, and a diet high in sticky dates and honey meant that almost everyone, from pharaohs to farmers, experienced tooth decay at some point. And yet, despite the pain and the primitive tools, the Egyptians were remarkably resilient. They learned to live with their aching teeth, to endure the discomfort, and to keep going. After all, in a culture that revered both physical and spiritual cleanliness, as you make your way from the healer's temple, you can't help but notice the massive influence that cleanliness has on Egyptian culture. The temples, the palaces, and even the simplest homes are all meticulously maintained, as if hygiene were a sacred act, a constant reminder of purity in both body and spirit. The Egyptians took their daily rituals seriously, and this included not just washing, but a rather sophisticated approach to health, wellness, and, as you've already seen, dental care. It's no wonder, then, that the Egyptian obsession with cleanliness extended into other aspects of health. Just as they understood the importance of cleansing their teeth, they also recognized the value of regular bathing, skin care, and ritualistic purification. In fact, many ancient Egyptians bathed several times a day, often using scented oils or perfumes that helped mask any unpleasant odors from the heat of the desert. In the palaces and temples, servants would prepare luxurious baths with water infused with flowers or fragrant herbs, sometimes even mixing honey and milk for a moisturizing soak. But while the rich bathed in lavish settings, the common folk made do with simpler routines, often relying on the Nile's cool waters or a bucket of rainwater collected during the infrequent rains. When it came to skincare, ancient Egyptians were ahead of their time. They developed balms and ointments made from ingredients like beeswax, olive oil, and frankincense to keep their skin soft, smooth, and protected from the harsh sun. Some of these balms were also used on the teeth, an early attempt at both cosmetic dentistry and dental hygiene. The oils helped to protect gums from the dryness and cracking caused by the desert air, while the beeswax formed a protective coating over teeth. But as much as the Egyptians understood the importance of body cleanliness, there was also an underlying belief in the spiritual implications of hygiene. In their worldview, physical health was inextricably linked to spiritual well-being. They believed that disease and decay were not just physical ailments, but signs of spiritual imbalance, an indication that the gods were displeased. That's where the role of temples and priests comes in. The priests of Imhotep, not only the god of healing, but also of writing and wisdom, held an elevated status in Egyptian society. They were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, and their knowledge of health was considered divine. These priests didn't just treat physical ailments, they also helped people maintain their spiritual health through ritual cleansing and offerings to the gods. Even the simplest household could not escape the importance of ritual purity. Before a meal, it was customary to wash the hands and face, not just as a hygienic practice, but as a way of aligning oneself with divine favor. The same went for after eating. The Egyptians would often rinse their mouths, not just to remove food particles, but as an act of spiritual cleansing. But as much as they valued hygiene, the Egyptians were also realistic. They understood that no amount of washing could completely protect someone from the inevitable wear and tear of life. Tooth decay was just one of the many consequences of living in a world filled with grit and dust. In fact, the ancient Egyptians had a particular phrase for this, a saying that translates roughly to, "The dust of the earth is our fate." It's a reminder that even in the most pristine of temples or the most carefully tended gardens, the constant march of time will eventually take its toll. Interestingly, the Egyptians also had an early understanding of the connection between diet and health. They believed that food, what you consumed and how you prepared it, directly influenced your health, including your dental well-being. The consumption of coarse grains, sticky dates, and honey wasn't just a matter of taste. It was a daily gamble, one that might leave you with strong teeth or a mouthful of painful decay. As we've seen, the Egyptians weren't shy about experimenting with various foods and potions to fight tooth decay. But perhaps more intriguing is the idea that they might have known something we only discovered much later: the correlation between sugar consumption and dental damage. Though they didn't have the modern scientific vocabulary to describe it, the Egyptians were aware of the harmful effects of their sweet, sticky foods on their teeth, and they made efforts to mitigate those effects through oral care routines, from chew sticks to tooth powders. Still, it's impossible to ignore the fact that these early practices, while ingenious, were no match for the challenges posed by the Egyptian diet. The frequent use of barley, for example, made for a very gritty bread, and the high sugar content in fruits and honey contributed to tooth decay in ways that we still see today. But for the ancient Egyptians, as you drift along the Nile, reflecting on the meticulous care the Egyptians took with their teeth, it's fascinating to think how their practices spread to other ancient cultures. Their knowledge of oral hygiene wasn't confined to Egypt alone. Through trade, conquest, and cultural exchange, their dental techniques gradually made their way to neighboring civilizations. Just as we can trace modern dental care to the ancient Egyptians, their innovations laid the groundwork for oral health practices in Greece, Rome, and the Islamic world. It was the Greeks who, like many others, admired Egyptian advancements. In fact, much of their knowledge on medicine, including dental care, was borrowed directly from the Egyptians. The Greeks had an early version of their own dentist, with philosophers like Hippocrates writing about the need to keep teeth healthy. His writings, steeped in the philosophy of balance and natural remedies, echoed the Egyptian idea that a clean mouth was not just a mark of health, but a form of spiritual well-being. But it's the Greeks' practical approach to dental care that really stands out. They took the Egyptian use of chew sticks, small twigs from trees like the neem tree, known for its antibacterial properties, and refined the practice. Greek doctors began using specific plants and herbs for their tooth cleaning routines. Among these was the herb rue, which was thought to have antibacterial properties, and a variety of crushed minerals, including pumice and crushed coral, which served as the first rudimentary toothpaste. In fact, when you look at the earliest recorded use of dental tools, you'll find that the Greeks and Romans took the Egyptian foundation and began to build on it. Ancient Greek temples, much like the Egyptian ones, included early medical practices for their citizens, though in these settings, dental care was often more about the wealthy. For the common people, remedies for tooth pain were often a mixture of superstition and practical remedies, like applying ash or vinegar to soothe the gums. One interesting side note: some ancient Roman dental tools have been uncovered, tools that are shockingly close to what we use today. Archaeologists have found tiny silver hooks, delicate scrapers, and small metal probes that look eerily like modern dental instruments. These tools reveal that by the Roman period, tooth cleaning had become more sophisticated, involving not only scrubbing, but also removing plaque and performing minor procedures. Yet, even in Roman times, the concept of a dentist was still a luxury. Though they had professionals, they weren't quite as ubiquitous as our modern dental care providers. Instead, wealthy Roman citizens would have their teeth attended to by personal slaves, often those trained in medicine. Though ancient Greeks and Romans made some impressive advances in dental care, it wasn't until the Islamic Golden Age that we see a truly revolutionary approach to dental health. With the expansion of the Islamic world, scholars translated Greek and Roman medical texts, including those on dentistry, and added their own contributions, elevating the practice of dentistry to a more refined science. In fact, Islamic physicians were the first to apply the concept of dental surgery for more than just extraction. They began using sophisticated methods of filling cavities, even developing early forms of dental fillings made from gold, silver, and even precious stones. Historians still debate whether Islamic scholars were the first to use the idea of fillings, or if it was just a natural progression of previous practices. But one thing is certain: the Golden Age of Islam witnessed enormous strides in healthcare, including dentistry. The famous physician Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna, included detailed instructions for treating dental diseases in his influential medical text, the Canon of Medicine. It was in this text that he documented his observations of how the teeth and gums should be treated, stating that tooth decay was a result of an imbalance in the body's humors. He also recommended various methods for dental care, such as using gold and silver to fill cavities. But let's return to the present day, where dental care has come a long way from the twigs and rudimentary drills of ancient civilizations. We have fluoride toothpaste, electric toothbrushes, and even whole teams of dental hygienists who make sure our teeth are in tip-top shape. However, there are still some old-school techniques, like oil pulling and herbal toothpastes, that trace their origins all the way back to ancient Egypt. There's something oddly comforting about knowing that ancient Egyptians, in their pursuit of purity and spiritual balance, were the first to recognize the value of a good tooth-cleaning routine. The same practice that started with twigs, honey, and poppy sap has transformed into the sophisticated tools and techniques we rely on today. It's a testament to human ingenuity. As you continue your journey through the ancient world, it's fascinating to see how much of Egyptian daily life was rooted in an almost spiritual approach to cleanliness. The Egyptians weren't merely concerned with hygiene for its own sake. They viewed it as a gateway to spiritual purity, a form of alignment with the gods. In fact, their whole conception of health intertwined with their understanding of the universe, where everything was in balance. The body, mind, and soul were all part of a delicate equilibrium that had to be maintained at all costs. This sacred connection to cleanliness was evident in almost every aspect of life, from personal care to religious practices. Take bathing, for example. To the Egyptians, bathing wasn't just about scrubbing away the day's dirt. It was about preparing the body and spirit for divine encounters. Ritual baths were a crucial part of religious ceremonies, especially in the temples, where priests would purify themselves before entering the sacred spaces. This wasn't just a physical purification. It was a symbolic act, a ritual that mirrored the daily order of the cosmos. Interestingly, the concept of purification extended beyond just the human body. Egyptians also used purification rituals for their homes, their temples, and even the food they consumed. The belief was that everything in the world carried a certain degree of impurity, and it was the task of the Egyptians to cleanse themselves, their possessions, and their environment in order to live in harmony with the divine. This belief was so ingrained in their culture that even their most basic daily tasks, like eating and sleeping, had a ritualistic component. For instance, it was common practice to offer a small portion of one's meal to the gods before eating, a symbolic gesture to ensure divine favor. And it wasn't just physical hygiene that mattered. The Egyptians had an entire spiritual framework around health and healing. Disease, illness, and decay weren't seen merely as physical conditions. They were also interpreted as spiritual imbalances. The body's health was believed to be directly connected to the soul's purity. Thus, medical practices in ancient Egypt didn't just focus on the physical treatment of ailments. They also addressed the spiritual causes of disease. It's no wonder, then, that Egyptian priests held such elevated status. They weren't just religious leaders. They were the doctors, healers, and therapists who tended to the body and the soul. One of the most significant ways the Egyptians practiced their connection to health was through the use of plants and herbs. They had an extensive knowledge of medicinal plants, some of which were later adopted by the Greeks, Romans, and other cultures. For example, the Egyptians were one of the first to recognize the healing properties of aloe vera, which they used to treat burns, cuts, and even skin infections. They also used various herbs like garlic and myrrh for their medicinal properties. These plants were integral to their health practices, and many of them were used in the preparation of poultices, balms, and tinctures for both physical ailments and dental care. In fact, their knowledge of herbs and plants went hand in hand with their approach to dentistry. Some of the earliest forms of toothpaste and mouthwash came from plant-based materials, like powdered herbs and seeds mixed with water or honey. The Egyptians also used these concoctions to treat tooth pain and gum disease. It's fascinating to think that, long before modern dentistry emerged, the Egyptians had developed their own form of natural oral care, one rooted in the very same principles that governed their overall approach to health: balance, harmony, and divine order. But the Egyptians' commitment to health didn't stop at individual care. They also had a deeply ingrained understanding of public health, particularly when it came to sanitation. In fact, their efforts at maintaining hygiene extended to urban planning. Ancient Egyptian cities, particularly in the New Kingdom, were some of the first to incorporate public baths, drainage systems, and other sanitation measures that we now associate with modern public health initiatives. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of elaborate bathhouses in the larger cities, some equipped with hot and cold pools, which indicate the sophistication of their understanding of hygiene and health. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians' public health measures were born from a genuine understanding of the importance of cleanliness, or if they were simply religious rituals. Some believe the drive for cleanliness came from a deep-seated belief in the need for purity before approaching the gods. Others argue that it was a practical solution to the challenges of living in a hot, dry desert environment. Either way, the Egyptians were clearly ahead of their time in their approach to public health, laying the groundwork for sanitation practices. Now that you've seen how the Egyptians were pioneers in hygiene and dental care, it's intriguing to see how their practices influenced the civilizations that came after them. The Egyptians didn't just develop their own methods. They created a legacy that spread throughout the ancient world, one that would slowly evolve and continue influencing dental care practices for centuries. The journey of their dental innovations, from the Nile to the Roman Empire and beyond, reveals a fascinating tale of cultural exchange and advancement. As their empire expanded, the Egyptians shared their knowledge with neighboring peoples, including the Greeks and Romans. In fact, Greek and Roman thinkers often praised Egyptian civilization for its wisdom, which included insights into medicine, agriculture, and, yes, hygiene. While the Greeks and Romans made their own contributions to dental care, many of their ideas were rooted in Egyptian practices. Take, for example, the Greeks, who were particularly keen on the art of balance and proportion in all things, including the body. The Egyptians, with their deeply rooted beliefs in harmony, had already established practices to promote a healthy mouth, seeing it as part of the broader balance within the body. The Greeks admired this and, in their own pursuit of health, adopted and adapted many Egyptian techniques. The Greeks were also the first to write about oral health in a more systematic way. In his famous text, On the Art of Medicine, Hippocrates detailed treatments for toothaches using remedies like vinegar and salt, both substances that the Egyptians had used in their own healing rituals. The Greeks, however, took these practices a step further, suggesting methods like brushing the teeth with a mixture of crushed bones and oyster shells to remove plaque. But, interestingly, many of these methods were based on the assumption that tooth decay was caused by a buildup of excess humors in the body, an idea that originated with the Egyptians. Historians still debate whether the Greeks truly improved upon Egyptian practices or if they simply borrowed ideas. Some argue that the Greeks introduced more analytical methods, while others contend that they were still using fundamentally Egyptian concepts, but dressed them in their own philosophical terms. Either way, the influence of Egypt on Greek and Roman dental care is undeniable. The Romans, too, were greatly influenced by Egyptian dental practices. The famed Roman physician, Aulus Cornelius Celsus, wrote extensively on health and medicine, and many of his dental treatments mirrored those of the Egyptians. For instance, Celsus described using a type of rough, abrasive powder to clean the teeth, similar to the Egyptian practices with crushed stones and sand. It wasn't just the wealthy who practiced dental care in Rome. While the rich had access to skilled medical professionals and personal attendants, the common people often had to rely on home remedies. These remedies were often handed down through generations and were based on the herbal knowledge that had been passed down from Egypt. For example, the Romans were known to use a variety of herbs to clean their teeth, such as mint and thyme, which are still common ingredients in modern toothpaste today. But the Romans were also known for their advanced public health systems, which included the development of public baths and sanitation systems. These innovations, again, owe a great debt to the Egyptians, who had pioneered similar systems in their own cities. It's clear that Egyptian ideas about hygiene, both personal and public, had a lasting impact on the Roman Empire and laid the groundwork for future advancements in public health. Moving further into the Middle Ages, Egyptian dental care practices began to fade from the Western world, replaced by other, less sophisticated methods. However, The influence of ancient Egypt on Eastern civilizations, particularly in the Islamic world, was far from over. During the Islamic Golden Age, scholars translated and expanded upon Greek and Roman medical texts, including those on dentistry, which had been influenced by Egyptian practices. As we'll see, this resurgence of interest in dental care during the medieval period would pave the way for modern dentistry. In the Islamic world, scholars such as Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and al-Zahrawi made significant contributions to medical and dental knowledge. They were familiar with the works of Greek and Roman physicians, but they also recognized the value of the ancient Egyptian knowledge that had been passed down through the centuries. Avicenna, in particular, wrote extensively on dental care in his famous work, The Canon of Medicine, outlining various remedies for toothaches, cavities, and gum diseases. He even described early forms of dental fillings, which were made from materials like gold and silver, materials that the Egyptians had used for centuries. It's fascinating, isn't it? How something as simple as brushing your teeth today has roots that stretch all the way back to ancient Egypt. You might never have thought about it before, but the toothpaste tube sitting on your bathroom sink is the end result of thousands of years of refinement, a legacy that began on the banks of the Nile. Yet modern dental care is not just a continuation of ancient practices, it's also a transformation that has introduced remarkable innovations over the last few centuries. As we explore the journey from Egyptian methods to contemporary dental hygiene, it's clear that we owe much of what we know today to the lessons learned from those ancient civilizations. By the time dentistry became a formal profession in the 19th century, dental care had already undergone significant shifts. While ancient Egyptians used rudimentary tools and natural substances for oral health, modern dentistry emerged through a combination of scientific breakthroughs and the gradual accumulation of knowledge over time. But before we delve into the scientific advancements, it's worth noting how the transition from medieval times to modernity saw dentistry transformed from a niche trade into a well-established medical field. During the medieval period, dental care was primarily provided by barbers, blacksmiths, and other tradespeople. This was a far cry from the expertise we associate with modern dentists today. Barbers were often the go-to professionals for tooth extractions, which were performed with little regard for pain management. If you've ever heard of the phrase barber surgeon, it's because these practitioners were responsible for everything from haircuts to amputations. However, it wasn't until the Renaissance that dentistry began to be regarded as a specialized field. The work of early European pioneers like Pierre Fauchard, often called the father of modern dentistry, marked the beginning of a scientific approach to oral care. Fauchard, who worked in France in the early 1700s, is credited with creating the first comprehensive system for dental hygiene and treatment. He not only refined techniques for tooth extractions, but also developed early methods for filling cavities and treating gum disease. He even designed the first dental chair, which made the process much more comfortable for the patient and much less like something out of a horror movie. Fauchard's efforts paved the way for more advances in dental treatment that would soon follow. Historians still debate whether Fauchard's innovations were purely his own or if they were built upon earlier Egyptian knowledge, possibly via the Islamic scholars who preserved and expanded upon ancient texts. Some argue that Fauchard was undoubtedly influenced by the broader historical context of medicine, which included Egypt's teachings on health and hygiene. Others contend that Fauchard's discoveries were part of the larger movement of scientific advancement during the Enlightenment. Regardless, his contributions were instrumental in shaping the future of dentistry. By the 19th century, the field had begun to formalize with the founding of dental schools and the creation of professional organizations like the American Dental Association. This period also saw the introduction of dental instruments like the electric drill, a game changer that made procedures faster and more precise. Along with the development of new materials, such as silver amalgam for fillings, dentistry began to move away from its primitive roots. And then came fluoride. While the Egyptians had used natural substances like salt and vinegar to clean their teeth, modern dentistry has embraced the mineral fluoride as one of the most significant advances in preventing tooth decay. The widespread use of fluoride, particularly in toothpaste and public water systems, has helped reduce cavities and improve oral health across the globe. This method, which became standard in the 20th century, is the modern-day descendant of ancient Egyptian efforts to maintain a balanced, healthy mouth. Now, you might be wondering, how did these ancient Egyptian methods of dental care survive the centuries and become so integral to our daily routines? Well, it's largely because those early practices were based on principles that resonate with us today. The Egyptians understood that the mouth, like the rest of the body, needed care and attention, and that small, regular actions could have lasting effects. They created routines, cleaning their teeth with plant-based materials, using mouthwash made of wine, and seeking dental care from healers that established the groundwork for what we now know as oral hygiene. Of course, it's important to remember that modern dentistry has made incredible strides since the days of ancient Egypt. Today, we have advanced diagnostic tools, pain management techniques, and treatments that can repair and replace teeth with remarkable precision. As we near the end of this journey through ancient Egyptian dental care, it's interesting to reflect on how far we've come and yet how deeply rooted our practices remain in ancient traditions. The simple act of brushing your teeth tonight, something so ordinary and routine, carries with it the weight of millennia of human history, care, and wisdom. If you pause for just a moment, you might even feel a small, quiet connection to those early Egyptians who were so meticulous about their hygiene. After all, what you're doing today is not just a modern convenience. It's part of an ancient legacy, one that shaped how civilizations cared for themselves and their bodies. Imagine for a moment how surreal it must have been for those ancient Egyptians. They had no access to the sophisticated tools or technologies that we now take for granted. Yet, they were still capable of inventing remarkably effective methods for maintaining their dental health. The raw materials they used, from crushed stones and salt to the chewed twigs of trees, may seem primitive to us, but they were a product of deep knowledge and careful experimentation. They didn't have access to the toothbrushes we have today, but they understood the importance of consistency and care. In a way, the ancient Egyptians were true innovators, adapting their environment and resources to meet their needs. Their use of natural elements for oral hygiene is a testament to how much human ingenuity can accomplish, even without the aid of modern technology. While our dental care tools have become more advanced, the basic principles they established, such as the idea that a healthy mouth is key to overall well-being, are still with us. We've simply built on the foundation they created. Of course, the story of Egyptian dental care didn't end with the fall of their empire. Over the centuries, their methods spread, evolving and integrating with the dental practices of many different cultures. From the Greeks and Romans to the Islamic scholars of the Middle Ages, each civilization contributed its own insights, refining what the Egyptians had begun. By the time modern dentistry emerged, it had been shaped by thousands of years of trial and error, experimentation, and cross-cultural exchange. And so, as you slowly drift towards sleep tonight, you can rest easy knowing that the legacy of ancient Egypt still lives on in your nightly ritual. Whether you're brushing your teeth with the latest mint toothpaste or using a simple, natural alternative, you're participating in a tradition that has been handed down through generations. Every brush, every floss, every gentle motion connects you to that ancient past, reminding you that your care for yourself is not just a modern habit. It's part of a long, rich history of human ingenuity. As you lay back and relax, let your mind wander back to those early Egyptians, brushing their teeth with twigs in the dim light of the Nile. Picture them as they tend to their health with the same quiet focus that you give to your own body today. It's easy to overlook the significance of such small, everyday actions, but when you step back, you can see just how remarkable they really are. The connection between the past and present is always closer than we think. Before you drift into a peaceful sleep, remember that you are part of a long tradition of people who understood the importance of taking care of themselves, of paying attention to the little details that make life better. You may not be in ancient Egypt, but you're continuing a practice that has lasted for millennia. That, in itself, is something worth remembering. Now, take a deep breath. Let the quiet calm of the night envelop you, and feel the soft, steady rhythm of your own breath as you fall asleep. As the night carries you away, think of the Egyptians, thousands of years ago, and the simple, thoughtful care they took in every moment of their lives. Let that peaceful, mindful connection be with you as you rest. As the night settles deeper, let's slowly bring our journey to a peaceful close. You might be feeling a soft sense of connection to those ancient Egyptians who took such care with their teeth, brushing with materials drawn from the world around them. There's something beautiful in realizing that every step we take in our daily lives, even those as simple as brushing our teeth, connects us to a vast history of human experience. The quiet rituals we perform, even those that seem so trivial in the moment, are threads in a much larger tapestry, a tapestry woven over millennia by countless people around the world. Take a moment now to appreciate the quiet rhythms of your own life. Maybe you've already brushed your teeth, slipped into your pajamas, and settled down for the night. As you lie back, feel the weight of your body sink gently into the mattress. Let your mind drift to the gentle sounds of the night around you, the rustle of trees, the hum of distant traffic, or perhaps the soft tick-tock of a clock. Let these sounds be as calming as the steady brush strokes of those ancient Egyptians. They, too, were in search of peace, health, and balance, goals that remain as relevant for us today as they did for them. It's fascinating, isn't it? How practices like brushing your teeth, which might seem so modern, are in fact the result of centuries of evolution, both of technique and materials. Yet just as we use our toothbrushes today, the Egyptians were, in their own way, preparing for a similar ritual. Even their modest beginnings paved the way for the advanced dental hygiene we rely on now. It's easy to take these innovations for granted, but when we slow down and think about them, when we consider the history behind even the simplest action, it brings a new sense of appreciation. Let the quiet reminder of this shared human history comfort you as you drift toward sleep. The Egyptians, with their simple tools and natural materials, laid the groundwork for the modern practices we now take for granted. But at their core, both their methods and ours come from the same place. A recognition that our health is something worth nurturing, even in the small, everyday ways. As you relax more deeply into the quiet of the night, remember that this is not just your sleep. It is the sleep of countless generations before you, each one following their own quiet rituals, to care for themselves, their bodies, and their health. Let the weight of their history gently guide you into a restful, peaceful slumber. And so, as the night whispers softly around you, remember that in this moment, you are part of something ancient, something ongoing, something that stretches through time and connects us all. Now, as you drift further into rest, let go of the worries of the day and embrace the calm, peaceful serenity that's always been at the heart of the human experience. Let yourself slip into deep, comforting sleep, knowing that you are part of an unbroken lineage that has cared for itself, generation after generation, with quiet, loving attention. Good night, and sweet dreams. May your night be filled with the same calm and care that ancient Egyptians gave to their own health all those many years ago.